Up until now, you have used a lot of functions in Python, most prominently the print function. And now it is time to write your own Python functions. Welcome, I'm Cons, and let's quickly talk about what a function is in programming. A function is a piece of code that is responsible for carrying out a specific task. A function encapsulates several lines of code into one line, the line when you call the function, and makes it accessible throughout the whole program. And thereby makes your program much more readable, because you don't have to repeat yourself if you want to do several tasks at different positions. And it also helps you to fix bugs in your code, because if a function is specific for one task and that task is carried out throughout that program, you only have to fix it at one position. Enough talking. Let's declare our first function in Python. So in this code fragment, we would like to declare a function that adds two variables together. We start off with the def keyword that stands for define. That tells our program that we are now going to declare a new function. Def is followed by a space and then the function name. And the function name is add. And function names follow the same rules as variable names. They can't start with a number and they can't include spaces. After the function name, we add parentheses, and inside the parentheses are the function parameters. Those are values that are passed to the function and then can be used inside the function to be modified or to be used for a calculation or anything else. And as we have two variables we would like to add together, we have two parameters. And that is x, comma y. So we have the parameter x and the parameter y, which are separated with a comma. And after parentheses comes a colon, and in all the lines indented under this so-called function signature is the code that is always executed when we call that function. And in that function we want to add the variables together, so we add z plus y, and then we would like to get the value of z back when we have called the function. So we use return z, and then make sure our function ends. So our function always ends when there is a return statement. We could add something in here like print bloop, but that won't be carried out, and even our Visual Studio Code over here shows us that this code will never run and makes it a little bit dimmer. So a function ends as soon as you enter a return statement. In our main program here, we can now call the function add, and we want to store the return value of add in result. So we enter result add 4223. So those values 42 and 23 are passed to the parameters x and y up here. And then we can enter print result, run that code, and we can see the result is 65. So let's quickly recap that. We declare a function with the keyword def, followed by the function name, followed by parentheses, and inside the parentheses are the parameters. Function also can have more parameters than two and also no parameters. That is completely up to you and how you want to use that function. Everything indented under the function signature is the function code that is always executed when that function is called from somewhere else. And here we can even save one line because z doesn't have any value for us, so we can just remove z and return x plus y, run that, and that will also result in 65. The function we have just written had one return statement, but functions can have several return statements or no return statements. So let's check that out. First, we're going to declare a function def maximum, which will return the maximum of two variables. So we again have parameters x and y, and we should not forget the colon in the end of our function signature. Then we check if x greater than y, we will return x. And when we remember, our function ends after the return statement. So everything that is coming under this return statement when the if was actually evaluated to true will not be executed. However, when the if evaluates to false, this return statement is not executed and we carry on with executing our program down here. And therefore we can enter a second return statement, y, because if x is not greater than y, then y is either equal or greater than x. And therefore we can return y. So we can check that. Result, maximum 42.23. And when we print the result and check that down here, we can see 42 is greater than 23 and is therefore the maximum of those two numbers. When you follow the video about pass by value versus pass by reference, you might already have a hint on how to use a function that doesn't have a return value. Because if we pass an argument that is a list, a dictionary, and so on to a function, not the values inside the list are copied over into the function, but only a reference of that list is passed to that function, and we can modify that reference and all the modifications will be visible inside the whole program. So let's check that out. First, we're going to declare a function called double that will double a list. So every element that is stored in a list is appended at the end of the list. So we have def double parentheses L as a parameter, and then we use L extend, and we extend the list L with itself. So all the elements that are stored in L are now appended to the end of L. Then we have a list numbers, and that will include 1, 2, and 3, and we call double numbers. And if we print numbers and run that piece of code, we can see our list is now doubled. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And we can even call this function several times, and this will quadruple our list because we first double the normal numbers list, and then when it is doubled, we double the already doubled list and therefore quadruple our list. And the double function doesn't have a return value because the list is passed as reference, and the reference is used inside the function to modify the list, and therefore the list modification is also visible outside of the function. When you're new to Python, it is sometimes hard to remember all the new concepts and functions. And therefore I prepared several Python cheat sheets you can pick up for free in my Gumroad shop as a high-resolution PNG. And if you want to print out those cheat sheets, you can even get a PDF version for a small amount of money in my Gumroad shop or as a tier 1 or higher Patreon subscriber. So make sure to check out the links down below in the description to get your Python cheat sheets. When you start structuring your program with functions, but you don't want to implement the functions right away, but you just want to have placeholders and run that code without function bodies, you probably run into errors because you need a function body in order to run the code. But Python has two keywords that help you with that. So let's quickly check that out. We declare a function def not implemented x, and this function is not implemented yet, so we can enter pass. And pass tells the function interpreter that this function actually does nothing, and we can actually call that function not implemented 1 and run that code without any errors. There's also another keyword, which is ellipses, which is 3 points. And if we run that, also nothing happens, but our program runs. Pass and ellipses are pretty much interchangeable, but they're a cool feature of Python that lets you run code that is not implemented yet and gives you a hint with the ellipses that you still have to implement something there. So far we have seen functions with one return statement, with multiple return statement, and with no return statement. However, the return statement only returns one value. But Python actually has a cool feature that lets you return several values with one return statement, in contrast to other programming languages. I already prepared a function that returns 2 return values. And this function is called quadratic formula and solves the equation ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. And if you remember, this equation can have 2 solutions, 1 solution or no solution. And we use a very simple formula you already learned in school. And for that we first get the square root of a squared 2 minus 4 times a times c. And if the argument under the square root is less than 0, our result is not real. So we return that this equation doesn't have a solution. And therefore return none and none. And we return a tuple, because this tuple can hold the two different solutions that are possible with this quadratic equation. However, when the argument under the square root is greater than 0, we can actually get a solution or two solutions for this equation. So here we can see the two possible solutions, and we will return those solutions as a tuple. Now you might ask, how can we get two return values inside our program? So let's call that function. And we store the return value in several variables separated by a comma. So we call this quadratic formula with the parameters 2, 0, 0. And if we then print our solutions x1, x2, we can see we have only one solution, but we get two values, which is 0 and 0. We can also call it with different parameters, x2 and x1, quadratic formula, and then we enter 3, 9 and 6. And if we print out that, print x1, x2 and run that, we can see we get two different solutions. We get -1 and -2. So let's quickly recap. If you want to return several values from a function, you actually return a tuple, and then you use several variables separated by comma to store the values that are returned from the tuple in different variables. If you liked this video so far, make sure to give it a like so it can spread to more people and more people can start to learn about Python functions. When your functions have several parameters, it can get quite confusing to get the right order, because if you enter the arguments for your function, they have to be in the same order as the parameters they are assigned to. However, you can use the names of the parameters to choose a different order. So let's quickly check that out. We still use the quadratic formula and we store our values in x1 and x2, then call quadratic formula, and this time we're going to use c first, and therefore we enter the name of the parameter c, enter 6, then we use a, enter 3, and then we enter b9, and if we check the result of that, print x1, x2, let that run, we get -1 and -2, and we can even double check it without using the names. We just enter 3, 9, 6, which is the correct order, and we get the same result. So it is always good to use named function parameters if you have a lot of parameters in your functions when you call them. Function parameters can also have default values. I prepared a little example here which returns a dictionary containing information on a student. So first name, last name, and the semester the student is in. When we call that function, we have to provide the first name, the last name, and the semester. So if we run that, we can see we get the dictionary Maria Hill in semester 3. However, sometimes it is useful to provide a default value for a parameter such that you don't have to enter an argument when you call that function. Especially in this case, when you start making new dictionaries for students, you probably start making the dictionary when the student starts studying, which is in semester 1. So therefore, we can add a equal sign after the parameter name and enter the default value. If we now call that dictionary get student dict and enter a new student, Laura Barton, and don't enter a semester number and run that, we can see Laura Barton will start in semester 1. Keep in mind that when you start adding default values to your parameters, every parameter that follows after that parameter also needs to have a default parameter. You can even pass an arbitrary number of parameters to a Python function. which is very powerful if you're not sure how many parameters you would like to pass to a function. So let's start off with a function def arbitrary args, and then we enter our parameter. However, the parameter is not just a name. The parameter gets an asterisk in the front, and this tells the Python interpreter that this function takes an arbitrary number of parameters. And usually those are called star args. And if you want to access those, you just use a for loop for arg in args, and then we can print arg. And when we call that function, we call arbitrary args, we enter 2, 1, 3, and maybe a number 5 and 6. And if we run that, we can see the for loop actually accesses every element, because what is passed over here is a tuple. So we can check the type of that args, and we can see this is a tuple, and we can use all the tuple functions that are provided by Python. And if you want to catch up on your knowledge on Python tuples, check out this video up here. Instead of passing an arbitrary amount of arguments to a function and then access them as a tuple, you can also give those arguments keywords and then access them as key value pairs of a dictionary inside of that function. So we enter def arbitrary args, and instead of entering args this time, we enter kwargs, which stands for keyword arguments, and instead of having one asterisk in the front, we have 2. And this tells the Python interpreter that we actually have keyword arguments as key value pairs. Then we can access those inside of that function as key value pairs, and we enter a for loop kv in kwargs, and we remember that kwargs is actually a dictionary. So we enter items, which will return the key value pairs and assign the key to k and the value to v. And if you want to catch up on Python dictionaries, check out this video over here. So we enter print k v, and when we call that function down here, arbitrary args 1, 1, 2, 2, 3, 3, 4, 4, and run that, we can see we have key value pairs 1, 1, 2, 2, 3, 3, and 4, 4. And this is how you pass keyword arguments to a Python function. I hope this video was helpful for you. If you got any questions on Python functions, leave me a comment. Don't forget to pick up your Python cheat sheets in my Gunmode shop or in my Patreon, with a big shout out to my Patreon subscribers. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you get notified when I release a new video on Python, programming and computer science. With that, I wish you a fantastic day and hope to see you soon. Bye bye!